Hello, everyone. Guillaume Nitzwell here, host of the E-commerce Wizards podcast, where I feature leaders in business and e-commerce. Today's guest is Avi Kumar, CEO of KUWARE.com, which is a full-service agency with a focus on marketing and implementation. It's always fun for me to speak with another fellow agency owner. We have so much to talk about. And recently, they acquired another agency called White Label PPC agency, where they offer white label pay-per-click management services to other agency. Today, we'll be talking Magento versus WooCommerce, and maybe not so much in a confrontational way, but more like comparing both platforms, strengths and weaknesses, and so on, can help people make a decision which one is best for their businesses. So before we get started, we have a sponsorship message. This episode is brought to you by MageMontreal. If a business wants a powerful e-commerce online store that will increase their sales, or to move piled up dormant inventory to free up cash reserves, or to automate business processes to gain efficiency and reduce human processing errors, our company, MageMontreal, can do that. We've been helping e-commerce stores for over a decade. Here's a catch. We're specialized and only work on the Adobe Magento e-commerce platform. We do everything Magento. If you know someone who needs design, development, maintenance, training, support, we've got their back. Email our team, support@magemontreal.com, or go to magemontreal.com. That's MAGE Montreal.com. All right, Avi, thanks for being here today.
Hello. Yep. Thanks for having me here.
And before we dive in the main topic, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey as an entrepreneur?
Sure. This current agency, which I own, has been around 14 years now, coming up on 14 years. And we started out actually purely e-commerce agency first, building e-commerce stores and all. And believe it or not, we have built even things like Zencart and stuff like that early days. And then did Drupal Commerce and many other things which have fallen on the wayside now. But slowly we evolved into a full service agency. We still do e-commerce, but we do the advertising and marketing for e-commerce also. And we also build e-commerce stores and also do B2B services as well. So we have kind of evolved to become a larger agency. And now with this new acquisition, which is Invisible PPC, we are also offering white label PPC services for other agencies as well. So that's more of a down market where local PPC is important. We offer that to other agencies as a service. But our main agency business and what we're talking about here is about e-commerce is very much focused on doing full consulting for e-commerce, all the way from marketing, advertising, building on different platforms, lesser so on Magento. So we are doing lesser on Magento and more on WooCommerce, and that's where we are having this discussion.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm a Magento expert, and Avi is a WordPress WooCommerce expert. So let's start talking about it. Like, when do you think, as the guest, I'll let you start, so when do you think it's the right choice for a merchant who's building a new site to say, okay, I should go, let's say, with WooCommerce instead of going like with Magento?
So first thing, I will say this outright. There are many situations where you will not even, like if 5 years ago, I would have laughed at the question if somebody said Magento versus WooCommerce. I would have said, what are you talking about? It's like apples and oranges completely. But over the years, and we found that WooCommerce kept on evolving to add more and more functionality and stayed still on the lower end. So now, yes, this discussion can be had, but there are certainly very clear situations where you do not want to just build on WooCommerce. One big one is scalability. If you're talking about a store which needs to scale, to large stores very quickly, then WooCommerce might be a problem. And the reason for that is primarily it can be scaled, but now you'll have to go through, you have to jump through many hoops. You have to partition your database, and you have to worry about all those technical details, which probably as an e-commerce software builder, you don't want to deal with. So that will be required, and that effort will be so much that you might as well stay on Magento at that point. That being said, there are a lot of complex situations which could not be done earlier on Magento. For example, you wanted a multi-language store, multi-country store, either with same inventory or common inventory shared between them. That just was not possible earlier. Only way was go to something like Magento. But now WooCommerce does support that. So if you have if you have a store which is first starting out, second, even if it is in multi-countries and overall the volume is not that high yet, then WooCommerce is a extremely good platform, very versatile, and still will allow you to do a lot of things which only come with the higher end platform. So that will be my general, 2-minute version of how you'll pick between the two.
I'll elaborate a bit on this. So first, we can say who Magento is not for. So it is not for a startup, for a mom and pop shop. And don't be fooled by the fact that you can buy a $99 template or theme from Magento the same way as WooCommerce. And this might make you think that they're really like competitors. In many cases, they're not. Sometimes they are, yes, but many cases they're not. So the more complex use case, the larger merchants, if a company is not yet making at least $1 million of sales online or offline, I would not recommend Magento to that company. It's made for bigger merchants. It's made for the mid-size enterprise. And since Adobe purchased Magento 3 years ago, it's just getting pulled more and more up market, where the larger mid-sized merchants, the 20, 25, $100 million company in the small enterprise, is getting pulled there to be, one of the many softwares in the Adobe Enterprise Suite. That you have the Adobe Analytics, you have the Adobe Commerce, which is the name of Magento under the Adobe paid license version, Adobe Commerce, formerly known as Magento Enterprise. And you have all those other Adobe solutions for the large companies. And they've just posted recently a huge case study of integrating all the Marriott hotels on a long list of Adobe softwares like this. So Adobe's pulling Magento more and more up market. So right away, you're a small business, you're a startup, something like that, Magento is just the wrong choice. Now, Magento is the stronger, bigger platform of the two, but that comes at a cost. It comes at the cost of complexity. It's heavier. There are some downsides to this, and development will tend to be more expensive on Magento. So you need to justify, why do I need the bigger, stronger machine? Can I get away sort of with a smaller machine and it still gets the job done? And I save on money and complexity and so on. So somebody should be looking at Magento if they have a very complex use case. Sometimes it can be a small or medium business that has a complex use case. For example, you have multiple warehouses, multiple stores, you sell in multiple countries, you have to handle all the logistics for all that stuff. And then you have multi-devices, so you sell many currencies. And then you have also the multilingual. So when you have a very complex use case, the more complex the use case, the more Magento will win, and the more simple the use case, the more favorable it will be for WordPress and WooCommerce. So you have one store, you have just one warehouse, you don't need to ship across multiple countries and so on. This kind of simpler use case will tend to favor WordPress.
So in general, I agree, Guillaume. The part where I would see it differently is, so one is, let's talk about just the revenue side. So we have managed clients selling $50 million on WooCommerce. So that would be unthinkable earlier. But the difference is that it is still a simpler use case. You're selling that much. And then we have clients selling in Hong Kong, France, US, Canada, all different stores, all on one WooCommerce. This is $20 million client. So even that would have been unthinkable 5 years back. And then we have optical clients where it requires very complex shopping experience, where you have to go get the prescription, get it. We build that on Magento first, then we build it on Drupal Commerce, a little bit simpler. Now we have same client running on WooCommerce. So there is a shift on many complex scenarios which is coming in. So I think it's getting a little bit more gray, the area where the line needs to be drawn. So that is something to consider. But yeah, if you're a corporate client and with truly 50 million, 20 million and up, you should seriously look at a much more robust solution, no doubt. But just not the startup. Even if you are at a 10 million or 20 million, you could be fine working with WooCommerce and be okay. And you got to look at it case by case basis. And especially other thing to consider is, which you pointed out, is just the cost of development for Magento is very high because it is very specialized. It does require a team like yours to be able to support that. WooCommerce, even though we do that and many agencies do that, but it is not that difficult to find freelancers who can help you in that area. So if there are minor changes you want to get done on WooCommerce, you can get away with freelancers. In Magento, it cannot be somebody who just decided, I will learn it on the job. It doesn't work like that. So there is that aspect of it. But that also brings the advantage of Magento, where everybody who has worked on Magento, they're professionals. They know exactly what it is. In WooCommerce space, once in a while, some customers we work with, they have had very bad experience working with some freelancer trying to mess up the store and all. That's kind of a rarer thing at Magento space because it becomes complex. So all I'm making the point is that line, what volume and how much complexity, is getting blurrier, and it's moving up with WooCommerce, and especially in last 5 years.
That is true. And also for freelancers, that is true as well. So you do want to look for the certified staff, certified agencies. Otherwise, you have the same problem in both platform, Magento and WooCommerce, of having people with questionable skill level. It's also important to remember that both Magento and WooCommerce are in the same general category of e-commerce software, that they are open source software. Yes, if you buy the paid version of Magento, formerly Magento Enterprise, now called Adobe Commerce, it is a closed source, if you wish, but there's still a whole community developing modules for this. So it is more or less still in the open source category. So it means that the programmer has full access under the hood, can do anything they want and so on, unlike, for example, the other SaaS systems, such as Shopify, BigCommerce, and so on. So you're shopping in the same general category, but they're positioned differently. One is more lower market that is moving up. So yes, it's true that the line is becoming more and more gray, especially at the bottom. And that is that a Magento or a WooCommerce website? The gray zone is getting larger, but it's more at the bottom left of the smaller clients moving up, and WooCommerce adding more and more functionality all the time. So, for example, if you start doing some comparison between Magento and WooCommerce based purely on features, whatever we say today might be true today, might not be true in 6 months. But as it stands today, it is still a very interesting choice, both of those, because you'll have more flexibility and ability to change things on your project to design a unique custom user experience. And let's say, especially on a SaaS software system like Shopify, where, for example, you cannot even edit at all the checkout on Shopify. It's forbidden unless you go with Shopify Plus. So you have additional flexibility there. In terms of flexibility, our experience back in the day, many years ago, when we were doing WordPress stuff as well, it was always more cookie cutter. If you were trying to deviate too much from how WordPress is built, it was just not built to deviate too much from this, and then was becoming a huge developer's burden. And the scalability was not there for more complex use case. It was scalable, like you said, in a simple use case. Okay, you sell that T-shirt, red, green, blue, small, medium, large. Yeah, sure. You can do $20, $50 million, $100 million of sales with this. That's not a problem. That's just such a simple use case, So it's more the complex use case where Magento will gain points. If you're, again, like I've said before, if you're a super small company, don't even look at Magento. My advice is very clear to you. Don't pick it. It's more something for the mid-size, or at least $1 million and up in revenue company to have the financial capability of developing on this platform. And typically even more like 3 million and up will be those that are really the good fit for Magento, but at least 1 million and up. And if you look at the whole ecosystem, especially with the paid version of Magento Commerce, then you add another layer of very advanced feature and technology that is absolutely not existent on WooCommerce. And when you look at and I'll talk a bit about that in just a moment. But if you look, for example, at the most prestigious independent studies like the Gartner Magic Quadrant report, WooCommerce is not even making the list. And then let's say Adobe, where Adobe partners, does not even give me any kind of battle cards against WooCommerce. So they'll give me like Shopify battle cards and stuff like that. But they don't even consider enough WooCommerce to even give their partners battle cards against WooCommerce, you know? So that's how they see it. So yeah, okay, they will nibble at the bottom of the funnel here a little bit. We'll lose a bit of the small client sometime to WooCommerce. It's more like an opportunistic approach to that, but they're not really targeting it. And just to finish that point I was talking about, like what kind of very advanced tech am I talking? I'm talking especially about artificial intelligence. So you have the Adobe Sensei artificial intelligence module that is then applied to all the other Adobe products, such as Adobe Commerce. So you will have the Adobe Live Search. So that's, again, it's a search module, but based with artificial intelligence to help you improve the search results, which brings it to another level. And you have also product recommendation with AI. So that goes further than classic product recommendation that you can have on any platform, Shopify, WooCommerce, Magento, the free Magento version, where you would just say, okay, well, if you're shopping for, let's say, cameras, then also show in the suggested product like accessories such as batteries and bags and so on. This is just basic product recommendation. When you get to AI, you will have automatic multi-version testing to optimize checkout. So let's say you have a large catalog, it's 40,000 products, then all your product recommendation will get changed all the time in real time to optimize conversion as to what do people actually add to cart and do checkout with while they're browsing that product. So you have something really powerful for your AI, for your product recommendation.
Yeah, certainly. So, but we got to also keep in mind, though, is it's Adobe, so they're integrating everything. WooCommerce is truly a open source system. So there, the integration, the way it works is, you just connect to any AI system you want, but you might have a latency issue now because it's not inbuilt. So that is the challenge, what I was talking about, scalability, that for when it comes to getting a functionality, it's not a problem. But when you have to go to third party to get the functionality in, you might have latency issues if it is really a large store. In a smaller store, you will not notice that latency, and you can get away with integrating with anything, out of the what comes out of the box. So the ecosystem itself of Magento is now Adobe is built in that way that everything is with them, right? WooCommerce is much more, everything is the add-on. It's the same thing with Shopify, actually. Shopify platform itself internally scales, but everything, all the functionality comes through the app, not from the Shopify. And when you're talking about giving, the battle cards against Shopify, completely understandable, because the big thing about Shopify is actually very interesting for if you're selling $50 million worth of t-shirts. It's very simple, but you're selling so much that you need that scalability, that timing, everything needs to work. The checkout needs to happen fast. And that's where Magento will come, even though the overall model is very simple, but that's where Magento and Shopify will compete. Now, if you're talking numbers, we did a little study on LinkedIn and we said, okay, how many businesses claim that they have, how many businesses we can find that have stores on Shopify versus how many say they use WooCommerce. So there were 2,960 on LinkedIn who said Shopify, and there was 12,604 on LinkedIn. I did not do Magento, but we can run it through. My bet would be the number of Magento will be actually lower than Shopify. So that doesn't mean anything.
For sure. Again, it means nothing because Shopify and WooCommerce are going with the smaller merchant. They're going after the smaller merchants. So of course the volume is huge. So for example, just in general business, you have it's surprising, you have less than 7% of companies in the world who make $1 million a year or more of top line revenue. And we know there are some multi-billionaire and trillionaire companies out there in the stock market, but it's still just 7% of companies make $1 million or more. And then depending on the country, then companies making 10 million or more or less 0.4% of companies. So you're right away, you're eliminating, anywhere between 93 and 99.5%, 0.6% of the potential website that could use the platform when you decide to niche higher up in the market as more like enterprise or small enterprise solution there. So for sure, the volume where Adobe will win, Adobe Commerce is top 1,000 internet retailers of the largest count. That's the one segment that they'll say, hey, Magento is the one that has the most merchants in the world, was 121 merchants out of the top 1,000 internet retailers that are online. That's where they shine. But of course, if you go more lower in the marketplace, no, Magento will not win there. It's actually losing market share year after year because it's deciding to move up.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So even on those numbers, so 0 to 1 million, there are 10,000 on WooCommerce versus on Shopify. But as you jump up to 1 to 2, the number drops to 400 on WooCommerce and 106 on Shopify. So you're right. As you go up, those numbers change quite a lot. But the part which I found interesting when we looked at is, especially when we're talking about WooCommerce, that even when you reach 9 to 10 million, the number is 269, while Shopify was only 71 at that point. So what that is saying is that as you're going higher end and you want some complexity in your checkout process, etc., it's not just the checkout process. Sometimes the configuration process of a product is much more complex than just picking colors. And that requires a lot of custom coding. And Shopify just doesn't work for that. We had a client which has a 14-step configuration process. The product is for B2B, but it is a physically configured architectural pieces. And that could not be done on Shopify. Yeah. So that's where Magento and WooCommerce are similar, if you will, because you want the complete process to be very, very custom. And then you do need to go to something like this. If the scalability is an issue, then you need to go to Magento for sure when you reach a point. And that does become a concern, right?
Yeah. Another point would be security. So all platforms, all e-commerce platforms, Magento too, had issues sometimes with security historically in the last dozen years or so. But for me, it's a hands down win on Magento. Like the WordPress security problems is just so frequent.
So Guillaume, so I'll give you that Apple ecosystem, macOS versus Windows. So it's presumed that macOS is more secure, but the reality is this. I come from Windows and Intel world. So pay attention to this and see if you agree that most hackers focused on highest volume wins. So the hacking community is working much more on Windows platform than Mac because it's a smaller percentage of the ecosystem. It's exactly same. That when you're hacking and you want quick transactions, you will go after open source, WordPress, and others. Because once you figure out how to get in, you can break into so many more sites. Versus if you go for Magento, all that effort will get you into, 2 or 3 big stores. So I would not say that, hey, they are inherently not more secure, these complex systems, but that comparison of how often people break into, I think is not fair. Because all the effort of hacking always goes towards the highest volume services.
I believe, partially agree. So I believe it's a valid argument, and it is true from like if you analyze the statistics. And of course, it's more compelling, let's say, for a hacker who wants to do maximum damage, is some kind of terrorist mindset there, to go after Windows instead of going after Mac OS. That part is true. I still believe that both platforms are inherently more secure, period. And also as a customer in the end, you also win because whatever the reason, there were fewer hackers that decided to try to hack, let's say, Mac OS. Yeah, but in the end, as a Mac OS user, from security point of view, you still win.
I would not disagree.
So, and for example, you have the Android versus the iOS for your phone. Let's say for the iPhone. With the iOS system being closed and every single app being reviewed by Apple themselves to see that there's no virus, of course, you're naturally creating a safer environment that it will be so rare that an app can come in and hack anything, So, but on the Android side, with the open market that it is, it can happen all the time. So
yeah, absolutely. I do not disagree with you on that. So that aspect is there, and WooCommerce is much lesser controlled environment for sure. because there is no with the WordPress and all, there is organization behind it, but there is not Adobe like situation. Somebody really focused on that, right?
Yeah.
Because it's in majorly Adobe's interest. I guess the model, I'm assuming it is still the same, used to be the community edition of Magento. It's just one or two releases behind. So, but it keeps coming down, keeps waterfalling down from their paid versus the other. So they will keep making the paid better, and you'll keep getting the advantage of that in the community.
Yeah, you often have the features delayed. Let's say they add the page builder exclusive for the commerce version for a while. Then now they gave it to the open source version. But for everything that's security, they upload they update at the same time for both. For sure, that's an important thing. Because what's their business model? It's very simple. It's a freemium model. It's like, hey, here's Magento for free. If you want something even more powerful, by the way, you can upgrade to the paid version. You know, so
I do want to talk about, when we talk Magento and WooCommerce, and we face the same problem in Shopify. So at least in the world of WooCommerce, and Shopify also caught a lot, they will not admit it, but it is the case, that as you add more functionality by adding more ads on apps on Shopify or plugins on case of WooCommerce, the site becomes slow and things start getting worse and worse. And to optimize those, one of the things we do is we work on optimizing the sites. Many times you find after all optimization, there are 2 or 3 apps on Shopify or plugins on a WooCommerce site, which actually are essential to that store because it's a free shipping or it is some special connection to inventory, but it slows the thing down. So you kind of, at some point you say, can't do anything unless we change this whole way it is. So what is the situation on Magento world as you keep adding these extensions? Do you face that issue also? The store gets heavier and heavier to get functionality, and then you have a slowdown.
I think it's pretty much universal that for regardless if you build on WooCommerce or Magento or Shopify, you'll want to keep the extension count to as low as possible, and you want to upkeep it. If you stop using a certain feature, just don't let it there, remove it, just general upkeep. Then the benefit would be if ever it's worth the investment, you could always do your own custom extension that has higher performance than the one you purchase on the marketplace. Let's say you purchase some $300 extension on the marketplace. If ever it had some bad programming practices that makes the whole thing load slower, you could always ask a team to build it, but maybe it will cost you $20,000 to get that thing custom built, with a specific focus on performance, because you have to think that the extension makers, they have a certain experience in their career that maybe it was more with small sites. And then what they've done was always working right with small sites, but then you arrive to a very high volume, high transaction site, and maybe that is an unacceptable practice on those scales. So it's supposed to be tested, but that's the nature of an open source market. You never know who's the guy who built that plugin. He was in his basement, or you don't know where in the world, and he just puts it there, and it's a free plugin or extension, and you can just add it to your store. Some are paid. And of course, you have some companies out there. Let's say on the Magento side, you have MSEE and a few others that are very well established, and they upkeep, let's say, over 250 extensions like this. So to give some level of quality. Shopify extensions are often mentioned to be of higher quality or fewer problems, which I don't believe is exactly a fair comparison than comparing it to either WooCommerce or Magento, for the simple reason they cannot modify anything. So yes, out of the box also it works in Magento. They say, look, you just put it there and out of the box it works. Well, guess what?
No. The apps on Shopify, I can tell you, we manage a lot of Shopify sites. Apps on Shopify have much worse problems many times, right? Yeah. And you cannot do anything. And in Shopify world, there are some apps you cannot live without because you need that functionality, and you have to pick out of those just 3 apps, and then you just stuck. You cannot do anything. So Shopify has the limitations point of view. It's much more. So we do go that other route of what you're talking about. We have at times even some basic apps. We build our own because it was such a pain to use whatever was available on Shopify, and it was making such a big difference for our customers. So, and if customer is willing to pay, you just kind of build it. Because the problem with the apps and extensions is they try to generalize. They want to leave every configuration in, every situation in, and so that's what makes it bloated. Now, most clients, they need one specific functionality, and that can be coded with a custom app, But then custom app is its own problem. Somebody has to maintain it, right? If you did it's a code to maintain forever, right? As things change. So it's a challenge. I think it's a challenge in every platform, in one way or the other. So from that aspect.
Yeah, that is true. You do need to upkeep it and keep it compatible with new versions and so on, and do some debugging.
Yeah,
that's always so. Yeah, WooCommerce is becoming more and more powerful, more and more capable over the time. It's an interesting platform, especially for the small merchant. Like there's a reason why it's so popular. It totally there's a space for it. There's a strategic space. It's occupying in the marketplace. Totally makes sense to me.
But I think it does have a ceiling to support your part. Is that it has a ceiling which will reach unless they decide to redo the whole infrastructure underneath again from WordPress. The scalability will remain a problem, and it's possible that they might, hey, I'm redoing everything, the platform underneath, for supporting the larger ones. Right now, it reaches a ceiling where, hey, it can't scale at some point.
So like to talk about that, for example, they may add feature in the future, but as we are recording this, let's say in Magento, you're a multinational or just a large mid-sized company, you have dozens upon dozens of stores and warehouses, and you sell in a few countries like that. You could have a different shipping method for each of those countries and each of those stores with a different preferred vendor for shipment, because this is west of America and east of America, and whichever country, and each store could have its own shipping carrier, even if you wanted to. And some could even have their own payment carrier if you wanted to. Tax rates will all be handled for all the multinational aspect. And then you could even have, so with Magento, it will connect even to Google Maps API to know which warehouse to ship from based on the customer's shipping destination, and it will automate, the optimization of warehouse management, how to prepare the shipment. And what about combined shipment? Let's say, okay, I have enough stock, but I need shipment from warehouse 1 and warehouse 2 to be able to fulfill. What kind of rules are allowed in terms of stock management and so on? And do we charge a second shipment to the customer, or it will be handled internally and all that? So you can go really far in this kind of corporate structure with Magento that WooCommerce would not be able to follow as at the time of this recording.
Yeah. So I have a very specific case scenario which will help your case about. I know you're not arguing on Magento side, but you're a Magento expert. So we built a WooCommerce site, which the master site served 450 other sites. So 450, this is like resellers who actually talk to the master site, and the master site was the supplier of these products, and everybody else bought from them, and they used to sell the site and the whole. So basically, the owner was selling, you can have your own store, your front, your everything, you connect to us, and we will do the fulfillment and everything for you. So when that master site, when we used to go in and look at the inventory, it used to take 4 or 5 minutes for the sheet to refresh after we made a change, because the database was so overwhelmed with connecting to all sites and anybody if this thing happened. So I was saying, man, this is the one I want to go back to Magento or something. But the thing was, the whole project was hundreds of thousands of dollars, by the way. So it was not cheap for sure.
Yeah.
But overall, each store had to be cheap because they were charging for it. So that's why the budget I could not build 450 Magento stores for them for that price, right? So that would have not happened. So that was actually an instance where we were, and we did not go to it, and we moved on. That something like Shopify with the scalability built in might have worked, or Magento would have been amazingly good for that, at least for the master, and just do maybe the headless kind of a store thing.
Yes.
And do Magento behind and just do all the heads different store. But that was to me, like, hey, this is a case of architectural problem with this system. It just can't handle all these other stores trying to talk and updating the inventory, the common place.
And when you're talking 450 stores, even in Magento, you will need to have some serious architectural and software engineering planning and hosting capacity planning and all that, because those are huge numbers of stores.
We were doing hardware. We were doing all dedicated and all, but even there, you had to do quite a lot, And so it was reaching, you could tell that everything is grinding to halt with so much there. But I love the project, just the complexity and seeing how things happen was a lot of fun.
Yeah, because there you'll separate each aspect. You should go headless, like you say. Like they're talking a lot about this, the PWA, progressive web apps, or headless. Not exactly the same, but we typically do both combined. So that you have a backend system, like let's say Magento, that's running all the data, the logic, and the processing, and then it's that's what they call headless, and then it's sending it to the head is simply the front end display. It's completely decoupled. So you can then display this in whatever you want. It could be a React, a JavaScript front end like Facebook, or whatever you want it to be. So that would be a good approach. And then you'll have your database maybe separated also in different hosting instances and so on. You might need to do database sharding if the database is that big and you have 450 stores.
Yeah, absolutely. So while we are geeking out on this, I do want to emphasize that at least our part of the work is just not the technical stores only. Our majority of part of the work is marketing and advertising for our e-commerce customers. Is the major thing we do. So in fact, if somebody came to us with a Magento store now, we'll probably go to you and say, you build the store, we'll do the marketing. If it is that big of a store kind of a thing, we are kind of moved away from that. But if it is, hey, everything can be done here, we will do it. But if the e-commerce part itself is such a big project, then we just go to somebody who will just build a store while we focus on marketing and advertising. We're just making more money for clients by selling side of it, what we can do.
Totally agree, because there's always more and more specialization as there's more and more technologies coming out there. So you're positioning yourself as a full service agency, but even that has its cap. That there are some cases, like you're saying, what if it's a mega Magento store on WooCommerce and say, okay, I'll go see some specialized shop, and we do the same for some specific points. Let's say there's an ERP integration, so enterprise resource planning software integration. Let's say it's with the SAP, or it's with whatever Epicor or some other big one, NetSuite. We'll partner up with some other companies who are specialized in that ERP. Like we don't want to jump into an ERP integration and without an expert of that platform in the mix. So we'll bring in another specialized partner here to do that project. So same idea.
Yeah, certainly.
Do you have any other high-level ideas that differentiates both platform or helps a merchant to make a choice between the two?
Yeah, first thing I would say is, hey, if you are over 20 million already, then I would not start with WooCommerce, right? If you're already there, doesn't matter what you're selling, how simple it is. Now, if you are selling a very simple configuration only is the main issue. After that, it's not going to be high volume, but it's a high value item. You could still do WooCommerce on the higher end because each product sells so the configuration is very complex, but the frequency of sales is low. You could do WooCommerce. Otherwise, that's the first guidance. If you go there, look at other platforms, right? And then the other thing I would say is, especially when we're going these hosted platforms, don't get fooled by the low starting price, because you'll end up paying for so many plugins and so many other things. The price goes up very high quickly. So many times, just building with open source, you can keep that, because a lot of apps on Shopify World, etc., they're a monthly payment. So which is in an open source world, many of them, you just buy the license for a year, you're done. You're not paying every month something. So you can, so each case got to be analyzed. And many times, even on the lower end, you will end up thinking, oh, I'm going to go really low end. Everything is ready for me, but it might not be. You will still benefit from some custom software in WooCommerce or any other platform like that, right? So that is what I would say. So just don't assume immediately that, oh, I'm really low, so I'm going to just go very simple Shopify. Don't even need custom. Or I'm at 20, so I'm going to immediately Magento. Maybe you have it's just a coding configuration. You don't have that much frequency. Scaling is not the thing you want. Then you might be okay, serve well with WooCommerce. But on the other hand, we do have that scaling issue. You're going to be in so many countries with so many stores. Then absolutely look at Magento.
Yeah, agreed. And from a general point of view, of course, your maintenance cost will tend to be lower when the software as a service platform, so the Shopify and the BigCommerce. It can be a good place to start to look. And if you need additional horsepower and customization and so on, then you sort of go say, okay, is this a WooCommerce case or a Magento case? And obviously here we only sell Magento, but Magento is not for everybody in every company. It can be a good idea to have an independent technical advisor that can help a merchant to choose which one is the right platform. And of course, that technical advisor cannot quote on the project to have integrity there, but that can be a good idea. So lowest cost of maintenance will be the SaaS system, software as a service, Shopify, BigCommerce and equivalent. A higher cost of maintenance will be, of course, WooCommerce and Magento, but you have so much more capabilities that you can do. So for many businesses, it's totally worth it. Say that this is the right machine to grow my business, to offer unique customers experiences, to automate the processes to way higher levels. And sometimes when you talk, especially with like the Shopify stuff, that you may hear, oh, I have a simple business, it's going to fit on Shopify. And often it doesn't. We had many migrations from Shopify to Magento because the guy finally realized, no, my business is not that simple. He said, oh, I'm just running that. I'm not going to say what type of furniture shop. I have a very simple business, but it was not simple at all. There was some stock, there was some made to order, then there was some containers and shipments on the sea, and then you had to forecast when the next shipment's coming back in, when there will be stock, and then there's automatic fulfillment. There was nothing simple about his business. It was actually quite complicated, but when you were actually start listing everything. But he was under the impression that he was running a simple business, and it was quite complex. And it was a perfect Magento use case, actually. So
I absolutely agree. And it needs to be analyzed. So our strategy side of the house, that's what we do when we get a client. First, we analyze and tell them which platform, where, and if their existing platform, is it serving them well, or do they need to change? So that's the first step when we engage for marketing. We just kind of figure out where they need to be instead of saying, oh, just here, build it. But we do get clients, by the way, who have a strong opinion. They'll come and say, no, we got to do this. It has to be this platform. So we have to convince them that, hey, just don't decide that quickly.
Well, we need to ask them why. Why do you want that platform? Why do you think that's the right choice for you? And to revalidate, even if they say Magento, I did turn down a $150,000 project saying they wanted Magento. So you guys are shopping in the wrong category. They needed an LMS system, learning management software that had e-commerce capabilities, not an e-commerce system, and then to build a whole LMS world around it with course management and all that.
Which can be
but it was the wrong way around. They needed all the software and course management and all that with e-commerce, not the other way around.
Yep.
So that's it. So we're coming on top of the hour. Anything else you wanted to add for this discussion?
No, this is great. I'm glad we talked. And as we have the other, my pet area is, then maybe we'll catch up sometimes, is the conversion CRO on.
Yeah, we can do a second episode about conversion rate optimization.
Yeah, especially on e-commerce. Makes so much difference. CRO. Totally agree. And that this platform does come in that, hey, from on Magento and WooCommerce, you can kind of do anything, whatever you want to test. In Shopify, you will be limited. What you can test, what you can try, because the platform limits it. So CRO is a interesting one for me.
Yeah, you can do it on any platform, but some will allow you to go further. That's totally the case. Yeah. All right, Avi. So if people want to get in touch with you, how do they find you?
Yeah, the best is to just email me or LinkedIn. The email is avi@KUWARE, KUWARE.com. And I'm there quite active on LinkedIn. You can find me, Avi Kumar, and it should be not that difficult to find. And I think I have my red glasses everywhere in my profile. So that should make it easy to find the guy with red glasses. Yeah.
Seth Godin style of marketer's glasses.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for being here today, Avi.
Hey, thank you, Guillaume. It was fun.